If you're over 60 and eating tomatoes regularly, there's a chance you might be doing something that's quietly triggering inflammation in your joints, making your arthritis worse, and you probably have no idea it's happening. What seems like the healthiest habit could be the very thing keeping you in pain. I'm Dr. Susan Miller, a rheumatologist with over 20 years of clinical experience, and I've seen countless patients whose joint pain improved dramatically once we identified and corrected their tomato consumption mistakes. Yes, mistakes. Because as healthy as tomatoes are, there are specific ways of eating them that can backfire, especially for those of us dealing with joint issues. Before we begin, if you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend hitting that button and turning on notifications so you never miss another health tip made especially for you. If you enjoy this video, please leave your questions and video suggestions in the comments below. I read every single one, and it helps me create more content to help people just like you. Now, let me tell you about Señora Maria das Grasas, a 72-year-old retired seamstress from Curitiba. She came to my office last year, barely able to hold her sewing needles anymore. Her fingers were so swollen and painful that she'd given up her beloved hobby of making dresses for her granddaughters. Maria had been following what she thought was an anti-inflammatory diet religiously. She'd read online that tomatoes were fantastic for health, so she started eating them at every single meal: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Sometimes raw, sometimes cooked. She was convinced she was doing everything right. But here's what Maria didn't know, and what I'm about to share with you. Tomatoes belong to a family of plants called nightshades, and while they're incredibly nutritious for most people, there are very specific mistakes that can turn this superfood into a trigger for joint inflammation, and Maria was making almost every single one of them. The first critical mistake I see all the time is consuming unripe or green tomatoes regularly. Now, you might think this doesn't apply to you, but stay with me because this is more common than you realize. Unripe tomatoes contain higher levels of a compound called solanine. This alkaloid is a natural pesticide that the plant produces to protect itself. In fully ripe tomatoes, solanine levels drop significantly, but in green or partially ripe tomatoes, these levels remain elevated. Let me tell you about Señor Carlos, a 68-year-old farmer from Ribeirão Preto. Carlos grew his own tomatoes, and like many farmers, he often picked them green and let them ripen on his kitchen counter. Sometimes he'd even cook with them before they were fully red, thinking it didn't matter much. Carlos had been dealing with knee pain for years, and it seemed to be getting progressively worse despite his active lifestyle. When Carlos came to see me, his knees were so inflamed that climbing stairs had become a daily challenge. He told me, "Doutora, I work in the fields every day. I eat fresh vegetables. I don't understand why my body is betraying me like this." As we went through his diet in detail, the pattern emerged. Carlos wasn't just eating green tomatoes occasionally. He was consuming them several times a week, sometimes in large quantities in his homemade salsa and sauces. Solanine can interfere with calcium absorption and metabolism in some individuals, particularly those already predisposed to inflammatory conditions. For people like Carlos, who already had underlying osteoarthritis, this compound was acting as a constant irritant to his joints. When we adjusted his diet to include only fully ripened, deep red tomatoes and reduced his overall nightshade intake, Carlos noticed improvement within 3 weeks. Within 2 months, he was back to working his farm with significantly less pain. But consuming unripe tomatoes isn't the only problem. The second major mistake is eating tomatoes in excessive quantities, even when they're perfectly ripe. Yes, too much of a good thing can be harmful. Tomatoes contain oxalates, naturally occurring compounds found in many plants. In moderate amounts, oxalates aren't a problem for most people. But when consumed in large quantities, especially by individuals prone to inflammation or those with certain kidney issues, oxalates can contribute to joint pain and even kidney stone formation. Señora Beatriz, a 75-year-old retired teacher from Porto Alegre, learned this lesson the hard way. Beatriz had always been health conscious. When her doctor told her she needed to eat more vegetables, she took it to heart. She started making fresh tomato juice every single morning, drinking about 3 large glasses. She'd have tomato salad for lunch, and often tomato-based pasta sauce for dinner. Beatrice was consuming, on average, 8 to 10 tomatoes per day. At first, Beatrice felt great. She loved her new routine. But after about 6 months, she started noticing increasing stiffness in her hands and wrists. As a retired teacher who loved writing letters to her former students, this was devastating. The pain would wake her up at night. She told me, "Doutora Susan, I was doing everything the doctor said. I was eating vegetables, staying active, but my hands felt like they were on fire." When we ran comprehensive blood work and examined her diet closely, we discovered that her oxalate levels were significantly elevated. The massive quantity of tomatoes she was consuming daily was overwhelming her system's ability to process these compounds effectively. We didn't eliminate tomatoes from her diet completely, that wasn't necessary. But we reduced her intake to a moderate amount, about 2 to 3 tomatoes per day maximum, and made sure she was eating them with calcium-rich foods, which can help bind oxalates and reduce their absorption. Within a month, Beatrice's hand pain decreased noticeably. Within 3 months, she was back to writing her letters pain-free. If you're still watching and finding this information valuable, comment 1 below to show me you're with me, and let me know what your experience has been with tomatoes. Now, here's something that might surprise you. The third mistake involves not removing seeds and inner gel in certain situations. Most people eat tomatoes whole, and for the majority, that's perfectly fine. But for individuals with existing inflammatory conditions, particularly those with leaky gut or digestive sensitivities, the seeds and the gelatinous substance surrounding them can be problematic. These parts of the tomato are higher in lectins, proteins that bind to sugars and can trigger inflammatory responses in susceptible individuals. Señor Eduardo, a 63-year-old accountant from Belo Horizonte, came to me complaining of severe hip pain that was affecting his ability to work. Eduardo spent long hours sitting at his desk, and the pain had become so intense that he had to take frequent breaks to stand and stretch. He'd tried physical therapy, anti-inflammatory medications, even changed his office chair 3 times, but nothing seemed to provide lasting relief. Eduardo was health-conscious and had been eating tomatoes daily as part of his lunch salad, always raw, always with seeds. When I suggested he try removing the seeds and inner gel for a few weeks as an experiment, he was skeptical. "Doutora, isn't that where all the nutrients are?" he asked. I explained that while the seeds do contain nutrients, for some people the lectins in those seeds can outweigh the benefits by triggering inflammation. Eduardo agreed to try it. For 6 weeks he continued eating tomatoes, but he cut them open and scooped out the seeds and gel, eating only the flesh. The change wasn't immediate, but it was remarkable. By week 4, Eduardo noticed he was sitting through entire mornings without that deep, aching pain in his hip. By week 8, he told me he felt better than he had in 2 years. "I can't believe something so simple made such a difference," he said. "I thought I'd have to live with this pain forever." But wait, there's more. The 4th critical mistake is consuming tomatoes on an empty stomach, particularly in the morning. I see this all the time with patients who've embraced the trend of drinking tomato juice first thing after waking up. Tomatoes are naturally acidic, with a pH between 4 and 4.5. When consumed on an empty stomach, especially for individuals prone to gastritis or acid reflux, this acidity can irritate the stomach lining and trigger a cascade of inflammatory responses throughout the body. Señora Conceição, a 69-year-old boutique owner from Florianopolis, was a perfect example. Conceição had read that starting the day with vegetable juice was beneficial for weight management and overall health. So every morning, before her coffee or breakfast, she'd drink a large glass of fresh tomato juice. She'd been doing this for almost a year when she came to see me. Conceição's primary complaint was worsening arthritis in her hands and shoulders. But as we talked, she also mentioned increasing digestive discomfort, a burning sensation in her chest, and general body aches that seemed worse in the mornings. I feel like I'm aging faster than I should, she told me, tears in her eyes. I own a clothing store. I need to be able to handle fabrics, help customers, and some mornings I can barely button my own shirt. The connection wasn't immediately obvious, but when we discussed her morning routine in detail, a pattern emerged. The tomato juice on an empty stomach was triggering acid reflux, which was causing systemic inflammation. The body's inflammatory response to the gastric irritation was manifesting in her joints. When we shifted her tomato consumption to later in the day, after she'd eaten a proper breakfast with some protein and healthy fats, and reduced the quantity, her symptoms began improving. Within 6 weeks, Conceição reported that her morning joint stiffness had decreased by about 60%, and the burning in her chest had completely resolved. Here's something else that might shock you. The fifth mistake involves harmful food combinations. The way you pair tomatoes with other foods can significantly impact how your body responds to them. One of the worst combinations I see is tomatoes with refined carbohydrates and sugar. When you eat tomatoes in dishes with white bread, pasta, or added sugars, you're creating an inflammatory perfect storm in your body. Senor Jose, a 71-year-old retired bus driver from São Paulo, loved his traditional Brazilian food. His favorite meal was pasta with tomato sauce, served with plenty of white bread to soak up every last bit of sauce. Jose would eat this meal at least 4 times a week. He came to me because his knee arthritis had progressed to the point where he could barely walk a city block without severe pain. Jose was confused. Doutora Susan, I eat tomatoes because they're supposed to be good for me. I don't eat fast food. I cook at home. Why am I getting worse? What Jose didn't understand was that the refined carbohydrates in his pasta and bread were causing rapid spikes in blood sugar and insulin. These spikes trigger the production of inflammatory cytokines. When combined with tomatoes, particularly cooked tomatoes in sauce form which concentrate certain compounds, the overall inflammatory load on his body was significant. We didn't ask Jose to give up his beloved pasta completely. That would have been unrealistic and unnecessary. Instead, we made strategic changes. We switched to whole grain pasta, reduced portion sizes, added more vegetables to bulk up the meal, and, crucially, we started including healthy fats like olive oil and proteins like grilled chicken to slow down the glucose response. We also reduced the frequency to twice a week instead of 4 times. Jose was skeptical at first, worried that his food wouldn't taste as good. But within 2 months, he reported that his knee pain had decreased substantially. I can walk to the market and back now, he told me with a huge smile. I haven't been able to do that in 3 years. If this is resonating with you and you're realizing you might be making some of these mistakes, stay with me because the next few points are just as important. The 6th mistake, and this one is huge, is consuming processed tomato products loaded with sodium. Things like canned tomato sauce, ketchup, and commercial tomato soups often contain astronomical amounts of salt. Excessive sodium intake is directly linked to increased inflammation and water retention, which can exacerbate joint pain and swelling. Many people don't realize how much sodium they're consuming through these seemingly innocent products. Senora Aparecida, a 66-year-old cook from Recife, built her entire career around traditional Brazilian cuisine. She took great pride in her cooking, but in recent years, to save time, she'd started using more canned and processed ingredients in her home cooking. She'd buy large cans of tomato sauce and use them as the base for her daily meals. Aparecida came to me because her ankles and feet were constantly swollen, and her fingers were so puffy that she couldn't wear her wedding ring anymore. She told me, "Doutora, I'm on my feet all day cooking. I thought the swelling was just from standing. But it's getting worse, and now my knees hurt too." When we reviewed her diet, we discovered she was consuming more than 4,000 milligrams of sodium daily, primarily from those processed tomato products. The recommended limit is around 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams per day for most adults, especially those with inflammatory conditions. We made a simple but powerful change. We switched Aparecida to fresh tomatoes and taught her how to make her own quick tomato sauce with minimal salt. She could make a big batch on weekends and freeze portions for the week. the difference was remarkable. Within 3 weeks, the swelling in her ankles and hands decreased visibly. Within 2 months, Aparecida was wearing her wedding ring again and reporting significantly less knee pain. "I feel like myself again," she said. "I forgot what it felt like to not be puffy and sore all the time." The seventh mistake is not considering medication interactions. This is critically important, and it's something many people overlook completely. Tomatoes, particularly in large quantities, can interact with certain medications commonly prescribed to older adults. They're rich in vitamin K, which can interfere with blood thinners like warfarin. They're also high in potassium, which can be problematic for people on certain blood pressure medications or diuretics. Senor Roberto, a 73-year-old retired electrician from Brasilia, learned this the hard way. Roberto had a heart condition and was on blood thinners. He'd been eating tomatoes daily for years without issue. But when he retired and started spending more time in his garden, he began eating even more fresh tomatoes, sometimes up to 6 or 7 large ones per day during harvest season. He came to see me not for joint pain initially, but because his blood tests were showing inconsistent clotting times, which was concerning his cardiologist. As we talked, Roberto also mentioned that he'd been experiencing more joint stiffness and achiness than usual. "I thought it was just because I'm getting older and working in the garden more," he said. What was happening was that the vitamin K in the large quantities of tomatoes he was eating was interfering with his blood thinner medication. This required constant dose adjustments. Additionally, the high potassium content combined with his other medications was contributing to electrolyte imbalances, which can manifest as muscle and joint discomfort. We coordinated with his cardiologist and adjusted Roberto's tomato intake to a consistent, moderate amount each day, about 2 medium tomatoes. This consistency was key because it allowed his medication to work effectively without constant fluctuations. We also ensured he was spreading his tomato consumption throughout the day rather than eating them all at once. Within a month, Roberto's blood work stabilized, and interestingly, his joint discomfort decreased as well. "I never thought vegetables could cause so much trouble," he laughed. "But I'm glad we figured it out." Now, this eighth and final point is perhaps the most controversial, but it's something I see increasingly in my practice. The mistake is ignoring signs of nightshade sensitivity altogether. Some individuals, particularly those with autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease, may have a genuine sensitivity to nightshade vegetables, which include tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and potatoes. For these people, consuming nightshades can trigger or worsen inflammatory responses. Senora Teresa, a 67-year-old librarian from Salvador, came to me after years of struggling with unexplained joint pain. Teresa had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in her 50s, and despite medication, she continued to have frequent flare-ups. She was frustrated and exhausted. "Doutora Susan, I take my medicine every day. I do everything right. But I still have these terrible flare-ups where I can barely move. I've had to take so much time off work." Teresa's diet was excellent by most standards. Lots of vegetables, lean proteins, whole grains. And yes, lots of tomatoes. She loved them and ate them almost daily in various forms. When I suggested we try a nightshade elimination diet for 4 weeks as a diagnostic tool, she was hesitant. "But tomatoes are so healthy," she protested. "And I love them in my salads." I explained that we weren't eliminating them permanently. We were just testing to see if her body might be sensitive to them. Reluctantly, Teresa agreed. She removed all nightshades from her diet for 4 weeks, then slowly reintroduced them one at a time. The results were eye-opening. Within 10 days of eliminating nightshades, Teresa's baseline inflammation decreased noticeably. Her morning stiffness, which usually lasted 2 hours, was down to 30 minutes. When she reintroduced tomatoes after 4 weeks, within 48 hours, she had a significant flare-up. We discovered that Teresa had a genuine sensitivity to nightshades, tomatoes in particular. For her, consuming them was constantly triggering her immune system, making her rheumatoid arthritis harder to control. By permanently reducing her nightshade intake and saving tomatoes for occasional treats rather than daily consumption, Teresa experienced the best disease control she'd had in over a decade. "I wish someone had told me about this years ago," she said. "I could have avoided so much pain." Now, I want to be very clear about something. These 8 mistakes don't mean tomatoes are bad or that everyone should avoid them. Tomatoes are incredibly nutritious, rich in lycopene, vitamin C, potassium, and other beneficial compounds. For many people, they're an excellent addition to a healthy diet. The key is understanding how to consume them in a way that supports rather than harms your joints. So what should you do with this information? First, if you're experiencing unexplained joint pain or inflammation, take an honest look at your tomato consumption. Are you eating them in excessive amounts? Are you consuming unripe tomatoes? Are you eating them on an empty stomach? Are you relying heavily on processed tomato products high in sodium? Are you taking medications that might interact with them? Second, consider experimenting with your diet. Try reducing your tomato intake for a few weeks and see if you notice any improvement in your joint pain. If you do, you'll know that tomatoes might be a trigger for you personally. If you don't notice a change, then tomatoes probably aren't your issue, and you can continue enjoying them without worry. Third, if you do choose to eat tomatoes, do it smartly. Choose fully ripe, deep red tomatoes. Consume them in moderation, about 2 to 3 servings per day maximum. Eat them with other foods, never on an empty stomach. If you're sensitive, try removing the seeds. Avoid processed products high in sodium and make your own sauces when possible. And if you're on medications, talk to your doctor about any potential interactions. Fourth, and this is crucial, pay attention to your body. Everyone is different. What triggers inflammation in one person might be perfectly fine for another. Your body will tell you what works and what doesn't. You just need to listen. Keep a food journal if it helps. Note what you eat and how you feel over the following hours and days. Patterns will emerge. Remember, the goal isn't to live in fear of food or to eliminate everything from your diet. The goal is to eat in a way that supports your health, reduces inflammation, and allows you to live your best life at any age. For some people, that might mean eating tomatoes freely. For others, like Señora Maria, Señora Beatriz, Señor Carlos, and the many other patients I've worked with, it means being more strategic about when, how, and how much they consume. Your joints are precious. They allow you to walk, to hug your grandchildren, to pursue your hobbies, to live independently. Taking care of them isn't just about medication or exercise, though those are important. It's also about the hundreds of small food choices you make every single day. And now you know that even something as seemingly innocent as tomatoes can make a difference. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might benefit from this information. And if you have questions or want to share your own experience with tomatoes and joint pain, leave a comment below. I read everyone, and your story might help someone else who's struggling. Remember, I'm not suggesting you diagnose yourself or make drastic changes without medical guidance. If you're experiencing persistent joint pain, please see a healthcare provider for proper evaluation. What I've shared today is educational information to help you have more informed conversations with your doctor and to help you understand potential dietary factors that might be affecting your joints. Take care of yourself. Pay attention to what you eat, and remember that small changes can lead to significant improvements in how you feel every single day. Your body is incredibly intelligent, and when you give it what it needs and remove what harms it, it has an amazing capacity to heal and feel better. Until next time, this is Dr. Susan Miller reminding you that you have more control over your joint health than you might think. Sometimes the answer isn't in a prescription bottle. It's in understanding how the foods you eat every single day are affecting your body. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.